Yay! Okay, so I am Sarah. I think most of you know.
Hi,
Hi!
Sarah.
I will be talking about the history of art because it was the only thing I do outside of uni because I like everything I do at uni. Yay! Anyway, history of art. Next page, please. Traditional thing of
She said next page.
Traditional thing of definitions. I am going to go through definitions and terminology. Please try and stick with me. It's kind of mostly worth it, or at least I think it's interesting. But basically, I looked on the traditional dictionary, history of art. Basically, the history of any activity or product made by humans in a visual form for aesthetical or communicative purposes, expressing ideas, emotions, or in general, a worldview. So everything, basically. And within that, kind of the relevant ones for modern society today is fine arts versus applied arts. So applied arts being basically the application of like design, decoration to everyday objects to make them aesthetically pleasing, but not always in a way that will actually add to their function. So this was the best example I found of it because it literally had the caption: the application of glass to the application of color to the glass cups is an act of applied art because they don't need any color to perform their function. Therefore art, which I also think is a very, very, very broad definition. So basically everything in this room is now considered art. Congrats, guys.
Like spoon.
Next one, please. What I'm going to be mainly talking about, also using this slide as an opportunity to put in Alexander McQueen, because fashion and awesomeness, because yes. But the main thing I'm going to be covering in this discussion is visual arts. So while fine arts can sort of be defined as, painting, sculpture, as well as, architecture, music and poetry, I'm going to be ignoring the music and poetry and most of the architecture side of things, mainly focusing on the visual arts, so things like painting, sculpture, and today conceptual art, photography, and printmaking, and the lines between art and not art got very, very blurry in the 20th century. So it's a very fluid definition and very hard to define. But I will be basically looking at the pretty visual things. Next one, please. So art history. This is sort of the main thing you tend to think of when you think of art history is, the classical Greek sculptures, marble, all that kind of thing. And honestly, art history was developed primarily in the West, so it tended to focus a lot on sort of European art history, and the Renaissance and Greek as its sort of main influence was sort of the defining standard of art and what art should be able to achieve. Happily, this has broadened a lot, which is fantastic. So we can now basically expand this to sort of include all societies around the globe, and it becomes basically an attempt to sort of analyze artifacts, also bringing in terms like things like the cultural values within which they were created. So next one, please. This means we can include things like awesome monoliths, because yes, it's a megalith. Monolith was later. So this is a portal tomb in Ireland. Most of them actually did have human remains, but there is still debate about whether they were specifically used for burial, but they are now considered as art. Yay, under our massive broad definition, which is fantastic because they're gorgeous and would have taken a very long time. I still don't think we figured out how people managed to get the giant rocks with the, These are very ancient things, like prehistory. I did have a date here somewhere, but I managed to lose it. No, I'll find it later. But, so now these amazing things can also be considered art. Yay. As well as things from other cultures, like this gorgeous work from the Tang Dynasty in China of a man towing horses, which is quite unusual actually, because most of the time in sort of modern art, particularly things like Greece and Rome, and through the medieval period into Egypt, Europe, the main purpose of art was to sort of display wealth and status, either by having a painting painted by yourself or being of yourself, portrait form, traditional royalty sort of stuff, or actually having art displayed in your house was a very big symbol of sort of wealth and status. So having something sort of every day as a man herding horses from as far back as the Tang Dynasty is quite amazing. You have to give them credit for that because it's a very unusual thing to do that early on. Come on. Thank you. So that's definitions. I'm done with definitions. I won't bring it up again. But so what I'm going to do now is basically take you through sort of the main periods of art. This is most definitely my interpretation of what is important. There's a lot of bickering around art and what is important and what influenced what and when everything started. So I'm going to give very, very fuzzy dates for most of this stuff. But this is what I think is particularly important and sort of interesting when it comes to art and art history and the influence on our modern culture today. So this is the main topic on prehistory, as you can see. So the general sort of idea of prehistory is that it's art created before cultures invented writing or were discovered by other cultures who had invented writing, basically. It's a very loose definition, and it can, yeah, it means that we get some very different sort of chronologies, as in you've got prehistory going for very long periods of time because they just haven't been discovered by society. So you could count the Aboriginal people of Australia probably as a prehistoric society up until about when the Dutch explorers came in, 1400 AD, because they didn't have writing, at least not in any kind of form we recognized. So, yeah. But unfortunately, with prehistory, I will be focusing mainly on sort of Europe and that kind of area because that is where I have that has been the main focus of my education when it comes to art history, unfortunately. But this is actually just a really cool bronze head I found from somewhere in China that I cannot pronounce, but I thought it was just very, very cool and I wanted to show you guys. So basically, the way you sort of look at art and in prehistory is sort of finding evidence of workmanship with an artistic purpose, which is a very sort of loose idea and quite hard to sort of pin down. So we know that such workmanship existed about 40,000 years ago in the Upper Paleolithic era, but there's evidence of sort of artistic activity, if you want to term it like that, but dating back to about 500,000 years ago with Homo erectus. So it's something that humans and human relations basically have been doing for a very long time, 500,000 years. It's something that's existed for most of history, and it's actually one of the main things we can use to figure out what was happening in that period of time. Particularly in this next one, which is just gorgeous and I love. It's again from the Upper Paleolithic. Sorry, this one isn't from the Upper Paleolithic. This one is from caves in southern France, and is the earliest and best preserved cave paintings that we know of. There's a couple of different dates, but the oldest you could possibly be is 30,000 to 32,000 years ago, and it's just amazing to think that people were doing this kind of thing that long ago, and it survived so well. I think the main reason it survived so well is no one discovered it, basically, until quite recently. So basically the purpose behind this kind of art is often sort of something to do with, ritual magic sort of things, particularly with the depiction of animals, because at this point in time people were hunter-gatherers, so they were very, very dependent on sort of the herd animals and hunting animals as a source of food. And it's sometimes believed they would try and paint animals on cave walls I think the concept was trying to increase their numbers by increasing the images, or something along those lines, but it basically resulted in these amazing drawings. And this is actually a really interesting one because it involves sort of scenes rather than just sort of individual animals. So you've got things like the rhinos down here actually engaging in one another rather than just being this sort of static random image. Okay, next one please. So the next main thing was the Metal Ages. I just really wanted to include this head because I think it's awesome, and it kind of looks like his eyebrows and mustaches. So basically this one is from, it's from the Iron Age. So this was when we saw a lot of sort of the emergence of sort of Celtic art at around 700 to 450 BC. But before this, in terms of the Middle Ages, we had copper, of course, which eventually became alloyed with tin or arsenic, and we had the Bronze Age. But basically, the relevance of these sort of Metal Ages is that there was a development in society and culture and technology that actually allowed people to do this kind of thing, like delicate stonework, and get to this kind of quality stone as well that they wouldn't have had access to before. So we've got this is the development of sort of cultures and civilizations rather than the just pure sort of hunter-gatherer. We've got agriculture developing, people are becoming sedentary, so they're having kind of permanent civilizations rather than becoming hunter-gatherers. And we get amazing works like this. Next one, please. And then we have actual art, what we're going to define as art. Being the first period in history where there was an invention of writing. So this was, of course, the great main civilizations, so primarily in the Near East for this focus, but so Egypt and Mesopotamia. So this is when you started to get like really big cities developing along a lot of the major rivers, so like Tigris, Nile, Euphrates, and the Yellow River in China. So this is where we get Mesopotamian art, so cultures like Sumer, which I've unfortunately not found an image of, but this is one of the amazing ziggurats in Iraq, I think. I've gone very well with my notes. Anyway, this is an amazing ziggurat temple from around the Mesopotamia. I think this one is in Iraq, but it's just one of those amazing things where you can really clearly see the development from, the sort of, it started off with the cave paintings, then we get to the megaliths, onto these amazing structures. And so this was around, I think, 400 BC. And this is also when you start getting the influence of the Greeks and the Etruscans. So they were basically basing a lot of their, they got a lot of their artistic influences from Egypt. But they sort of differentiated and developed a lot more. So we get the development of sculpture and painting. I think Egypt did have some ceramics, but Greece basically took it a lot further. And this is also where we start to get the representation of the body in a very sort of realistic manner, because they'd be basing sculptures of, athletes and actual people, rather than what actually happened in Egypt, which was 90% depiction of the pharaoh looking fabulous and hunting things, which we can see in the next image, because I had to include this one, because this is Tutankhamun. I'm not sure how old he's meant to be in this, but he died by about 17, 19, I think. But this is... Pardon?
He's having a great old time.
Yeah, basically. So the main purpose of sort of art and depiction in Egypt was a lot of the sort of religious features. You've got Nag here. Forgotten what these are called, and that's terrible, but anyway, so you've got a lot of depiction of religious features, as well as having hieroglyphs. But the main purpose was basically to display the pharaoh as, awesome and all-powerful, hunting many things. I don't actually know, deer? I think he's hunting deer?
Yeah.
Perhaps, but...
The sort of ostrich at the bottom.
Yeah, there's odd little birds down here. But you've got the dogs attacking deer, so I'm shooting deer. But yeah, it is basically just like him as this sort of almost akin to godship. He's very powerful, he's on his own, he doesn't need anyone, he's charging ahead and hunting all this stuff with, mad rearing horses. This is in major contrast to a really interesting figure in Egypt. Can you go to the next one, please? Who's depicted here, which is Akhenaten, who basically entirely revised Egyptian religion and art and was just an amazingly interesting character. Unfortunately, they destroyed a lot of the stuff he did, but this is one of the particularly interesting ones, because rather than that sort of glorified hunting, I am awesome thing, you have Akhenaten with his wife playing with his daughters. That is something you would never get, basically, from traditional Egyptian artwork. You would have had to specifically order the artists to depict him this way, particularly with things like he's got a bit of a pudgy belly, he's not particularly well muscled. It isn't the traditional sort of glorification of the pharaoh that you normally get, and he would have had to actually demand this, because it's not the traditional representation and it doesn't show him as this strong, all-powerful figure. which is fantastic. It's a very refreshing change, and it's a very interesting time to study, because he also entirely changed Egyptian religion from, you know, all these different gods which had many different Egyptian mythology is fun, and then it has about 3 or 4 main sections, and they don't like to forget anything, so there's about 3 different myths for everything. But he basically decided that there was going to be one god, and one god only, called the Aten, which is the giant sun disk you can see up there, and completely revolutionized art, and yeah, was a very, very interesting character who everyone hated, so they subsequently, when he died, destroyed everything. And went back to Tutankhamun, who was about 10, 15 years after Akhenaten. So you can see there's just the entire swap straight back to exactly the way they've been depicting them before, and trying to erase all traces of this guy, which is a pity, because it's very interesting.
Is this one of the only remaining depictions?
No, there are more. They have got other statues and things, but the main reason I'm saying they tried to destroy everything is because they removed all of the things actually inscribing his name, and tried to remove as many traces as they could. And he actually split off. He changed the capital of the city, so rather than it being the religious capital, I think it was Thebes at this time, he moved and decided to make his own city, because
Why not?
that seemed like a good idea. His name is Akhenaten, the city was called Akhetaten. Tribute to the god the Aten, yay. But that was absolutely leveled, basically, after he died. He built this entire city. There were people living there for about 20 years, I think it was. And it was somewhere that had never been sort of inhabited before, and it hadn't been inhabited since, except for like squatters, basically. So, and the people who came after him just entirely razed it to the ground. Archaeologists have gone through and they haven't managed to find sort of the layout of buildings, and from some records have been able to figure out sort of mostly what it was, but we have none of the artwork from that time or any of the jewelry or anything like that, but it's unfortunate. But he was a very interesting guy. Yes. Okay, onwards to the Dark Ages, because yes. The main reason we're calling it the Dark Ages is because this was one of the times when basically there was incredible power from the church. Most of this period of time is dominated by the church and sort of the depiction, so the rejection of reality and sort of the material world. So it was all focused on, you know, the idealist pattern. So you end up with these very quite flat images. This is, I think that was actually a page from the Bible, because the main source of sort of knowledge in those times was the church. And they did dominate when it came to knowledge and religious knowledge. Yeah, and it was the same actually. Sorry, this is all sort of Europe, basically. And onto the next one, it was similar in the Eastern Mediterranean and beyond. It was quite dominated by Islam and Islamic art. So this is actually, I wish we had a better quality image of this, because it is just beautiful. It's probably one of the finest surviving Persian carpets in the world, and it's, I wish it was a better quality image, because it is absolutely gorgeous. Come and have a look on my laptop after this is done, because it's pretty. But yeah, so religion was the main sort of defining feature of art during the Dark Ages. There wasn't a huge, there was sort of some other periods, but most of the time it was sort of focused on the divine and sort of man as being born into a state of sin, and yeah, it wasn't particularly fun. Next one, please. This is getting towards the end of the Dark Ages. So this was about the 1500s. And it is a portrait of King Henry VIII. And this is basically, you're going straight back to Egypt. The purpose of art is to depict the rulers as sort of wealthy, powerful,
Glorious.
influential, neckbeardy. Yeah, so it's right back to the sort of the original use of art in that way. And it's also straight back to the realism as well. So you've got the attempt at hyperrealism. So he's very sort of you can see exactly what it is and who it was meant to be. It's a very accurate depiction of, well, not necessarily accurate, it's a very realistic depiction of a man. I'm saying it's not necessarily accurate because
It was probably
he probably looked a little bit worse than this.
Also, none of us have met him in person, so there's
basically, but but yes, we assume he probably didn't look as pretty as that, which is kind of sad. But anyway, but after this we got quite a remarkable transformation from the Dark Ages. Next one, please, Pam. Into the Renaissance. Yay! No, this went right back to sort of looking at the traditions of Rome and Greece, and the basically trying to perfect depictions. And so this is Leonardo da Vinci's attempt to sort of depict the perfectly proportioned man. And his work is amazing. It's all sort of incredibly realistic. He was a very interesting guy. But it basically, this movement took Europe from the medieval period into the Renaissance. So it took away quite a bit of, well, I fib. The church was beginning to decrease in its importance. There's lots of arguments as to why this is. One of the particularly interesting ones is the Black Death, and everyone losing faith in the church a bit because you had huge numbers of the population being wiped out by this plague that no one seemed to stop. Exactly. But yeah, so it led to this into the Renaissance. And basically from here on in, there's lots and lots and lots of different art movements, and they all seem to overlap a fair amount. So if I get confusing when it comes to dates, it's probably because they actually do overlap, and it's very hard to sort of define these things. So as well as the Renaissance, on to the next one, about the same period, you were getting realism. Or it's also called naturalism. It's basically an attempt to represent subject matter truthfully, without sort of implausible, exotic, or sort of supernatural elements. So you've got a very sort of normal scene. It's a butcher shop. Yeah, and it's trying to actually depict accurate sort of life forms and perception, particularly when it comes to things like colour and light. But the interesting thing with realism is that it can also sort of try and emphasise sort of the ugly or the sordid. This is very, very morbid subject matter that you wouldn't normally see, and it's trying to sort of bring out social realism and the ugliness of things beyond the aristocrats, because that was what art tended to focus on a lot of the time in the past, was the aristocrats, because they were the ones who could afford it, basically. So this is actually a really interesting sort of revelation, trying to depict the modern average person, which didn't happen much before. Next one, please. And then we have the Impressionists. Yay, Monet! We actually have, it's not this one, but we have similar haystacks in the National Gallery. I'm so proud of it. It's gorgeous. But these guys basically moved away from that intensely realistic thing and instead tried to concentrate a lot more on things like art, light, and sort of allowing people to interpret it a little bit more themselves. It wasn't, clear cut, this is exactly what it is. It was more allowing that interpretation of light and colour. So yeah, they also sort of focused on ordinary subject matter, a haystack in the middle of the field, and tried to include sort of unusual angles and try and make their paintings sort of a little bit more dynamic. There's much more of a sense of movement in these than there are in a lot of the hyper-realistic ones. From Impressionism, I'm skipping a lot here, but I'm going to go straight into Modernism. Next one, please. Thank you. This is one of Picasso's work, which basically a lot of his friends and a lot of fellow painters hated and were really, really upset when they saw this image because it's deconstructed everything. I mean, you still get the feeling of the figure and the image and the face, but it's just there's no attempt to make it realistic. Everything's being reduced to shapes. And modernism itself was basically a philosophical movement. It wasn't just art. It was in literature and dance, and in a way culture as well. It's sort of a transformation of Western society. So it was basically shaped by the development of industrial societies as they began to grow, particularly when it comes to rapid growth of cities. So you also got a rapid increase in poverty levels as well. There were lots of people living in slums, and it wasn't fantastic. And it also spread from the industrial period into the horrors of World War One. So you get, there's an image I haven't included here, which I wish I had, but you start getting depictions of war and what it was actually like, because a lot of the artists, Otto Dix is a really good example, went to war, came back, and actually tried to depict it realistically as they had experienced, rather than sort of the glorified thing you tend to get with, like Napoleon riding his giant horse into battle and all those kind of things. It was also sort of where they rejected the certainty of the Renaissance, because with the Renaissance there was sort of this assumption that Greece and that kind of culture was just the epitome of excellence, and that was what they should aspire to. But there was also quite a strong religious belief still around at that time, and this was a period where people started to sort of question the church a huge amount more than they had before. So yes, it was a very interesting time period. And then we go to the next one, which is I just like this. This is Cubism, as you can probably guess. The title of this one is Violin and Candlestick. Candlestick? Violin? Something? But I really enjoy Cubism because it's something even past what Picasso was doing. You've literally just deconstructed the object entirely and haven't even tried to sort of you haven't tried to depict the subject matter in a way that the viewer can interpret easily. It's not meant to be easy to understand this and try and figure out what it is. It's meant to challenge you, and it does that very well. So this was actually one of the ones that sort of really started up in Paris, and you get during sort of the 1910s into the 1920s. So it was where they were purposely sort of analysing objects, breaking them up, and then reassembling them in a much more abstracted form. And basically the idea is that you haven't got just one viewpoint, you've got multiple viewpoints to try and, according to this, apparently trying to give the subject greater context. And there's another fantastic one in Cubism where there's a figure descending the stairs, and it doesn't look anything like this. You can sort of vaguely see the stairs, and then it's just this like multiple thing of heads, pretty much. But it's one of those, it's really sort of dynamic, and I love this because it sort of makes you curious and makes you try and figure out what it is. Well, at least for me. Okay, next one please. Quite a famous image. So this is getting into Surrealism, which was again a cultural movement. So it's mainly focused in sort of artworks and writing, but it was basically trying to resolve dreams and reality. So the artists specifically went out of their way to paint sort of unnerving scenes with like photographic precision and create like strange creatures from everyday objects. And I think the best example of this that I can think of off the top of my head, aside from this one, which is just the conundrum of this is not a pipe. Well it is, but it isn't. It's a painting of a pipe that's now projection on the screen. It's not actually what was basically the entire point that the artists were trying to project. It's just, this isn't reality. This isn't reality. This is a depiction of reality. And another fabulous one with just the making normal objects strange and surreal is another one we have in the National Gallery, which is by Dali, where he's literally gotten a telephone and put a plastic lobster on top. Because yes. So basically they were trying to make you question things and sort of express the unconscious in a way that hadn't sort of been allowed before. So you get things like this and Dali's melting clocks. It's these surreal, unnerving, quite often, images where it's just like, is this a dream? This can't be reality, but it's so hyper-realistic. Like you get quite often I find in dreams, where you wake up and just go, what was that? Okay, on to my last one, because beyond this, it gets very, very hard. This sums it up perfectly. I'm going to attempt to, but yeah, it's challenging. Next one. So postmodernism was basically, it was late sort of 20th century movements into, it covered a lot of things. It was sort of the arts and architecture, and it was basically trying to depart from modernism. They reacted against sort of the tendencies of modernism and tried to sort of change how people looked at things. It was often, at least in this case, and in the case of Andy Warhol with the soup cans, this is where you're getting you're getting sort of the invention of plastics, and things are able to be mass produced in a way that they never could before. So you just get sort of, particularly with Warhol's work, you get this sort of overconsumption. There's this availability of things that there wasn't before, and it's, yeah. This is just one of my favorites because it's a giant puppy made of flowers.
Is that Jeff Koons?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Yay! So this was actually called Puppy, and it's one of those things where you're just meant to look at it and go, why is that there? That does not seem necessary. And the point was that they could do these kind of things. It was physically possible and physically within their means to create giant puppies, because yes. Basically.
Sky Whale.
Sky Whale is the epitome of this.
Why not have twisted metal things?
Basically. And then beyond this, there's a lot of different styles. People have basically taken, most of them can probably be defined under postmodernism. It's basically a reaction from the average, and you get sort of good taste becomes entirely ignored. Good taste goes out of fashion, if you like. If you're describing bad taste, then you're actually avant-garde and you're revolutionary, and all of these kind of things. So you basically get this sort of explosion, in a way, of all these different things, where people are like, we actually have the freedom to try different things. And then you get photography thrown into the mix, where painters don't actually have to try and be super realistic, because you can just take a snap and you're done, and you can depict people exactly as they are, which panicked a lot of professional portrait makers because they were going to go out of the job. But it was very liberating in a way with the art movements, because you didn't have to try and be realistic anymore. If you wanted to paint the pretty sunset, you could just go and get a camera and it would capture it instantly, perfectly, exactly as it was. There was no misinterpretation. So it was very freeing in a way, I think, for a lot of people. And you got, we basically got an explosion of a whole heap of different ideas and concepts and things that people have tried since then, which I'm not even going to attempt to go into, because it's huge, exactly. It's huge and amazing and dynamic and exciting and fabulous, and I would encourage you to go and actually go to like the National Gallery of Australia and look at some of these exhibits and just try and think about them and why they're there and what they mean, rather than going, why is there a giant puppy? This is stupid! Yeah. I find quite often with artworks, people get frustrated because they can't understand it immediately.
The owl in Belconnen.
Exactly. But there was just a beautiful example of this was when you got into sort of the early 20th century in particular, there was a major thing with modernism in particular. You basically got the concept of what is art. Does it have to be, can I just claim something as art? There's a brilliant thing, there's also can I claim something as art, and sort of the status of people as artists, that we raise them to particular heights, so everything they produce must be art. And there was a particularly interesting piece by Duchamp, who got a urinal and wrote Duchamp on it, and then submitted it to an art gallery. And they accepted this as art because it was Duchamp. And it's fantastic because you get the challenging of that kind of thing. If someone random off the street had done that, it probably wouldn't have been accepted, and that was the point he was making. basically. It's just I have the name, therefore I can submit anything I want. And people have basically run with that, and it's created some very interesting things. I think I'm done with my ranting. Does anyone have any questions? Okay,
Where
cool.
can one learn more about the art histories without getting stuck into a degree?
Museums.
Yeah, museums would probably be my immediate answer. Museums and just art galleries. The National Gallery of Australia is amazing, and they have a fantastic permanent collection. In particular, if you want just general amusement, I would advise going and having a look at the early Australian things, because the early Australian painters were all English, and they'd all been trained in an English fashion, so they came to Australia and panicked because they could not paint the way they normally did, so you get very amusing artworks.
Wavy
basically.
trees.
Yeah, like wavy trees, and it's just like, that is nowhere in Australia ever. But yes, art galleries, museums, go and talk to anyone working in those places, because that is what they live for. They, most of the time, they're really excited by this kind of stuff and would love to talk to you about it. There's some fantastic books as well, if you just want sort of general representation.
It's a nice one by Gombrich.
Pardon?
The Ernst Gombrich Story of Art. Sort of like it's been in editions for decades now.
Okay.
But it's very readable. Like it's been set in schools and things, but you can get it second hand as well. So
Fair enough.
just look at any second hand store and there'll be usually nice editions. Because I've had so many editions over the years, you can just pick up anyone, pretty much anyone, don't need the latest. But yeah, it's just a readable narrative kind of history. Very nice.
That's fantastic. Perfect. Do that too.
I agree.
But definitely art galleries. Go and look at the stuff, because it's very different seeing it on the screen and having the context of this is a child, this is the thing.
Lord.
Basically, there are works like that where you just need the scale, because that is a point they're trying to make. Like the Mona Lisa is about this big. I'm not kidding. It's about this big. And it's next to this amazingly huge, it would actually be from about wall to ceiling, longer than this room, canvas depicting this amazing battle scene. It's just incredible and dynamic, and there's like blood everywhere, but everyone's staring and crowded around the Mona Lisa because it has that sort of fame and reputation. And it's really...
No, they're not looking at the Mona Lisa. They've got their backs
Oh, they're
to the Mona
taking
Lisa as they're
photos
taking
of the Mona
selfies.
Lisa. Yes, that was very irritating. But it's, yeah. As soon as you get into art, it also gets into the sort of stoppiness around art, and people get quite agitated about that. Yeah, basically. Also selfies, because...
I think the Louvre, the Mona Lisa was possibly one of the smallest painting in the Louvre.
Probably. Yep.
Definitely in that area.
Yes, you've got these giant colossal works and then tiny thing.
Yeah.
Anything else anyone wants to ask? Because if not, I'll show you the rug.
I'll show the rug.
Okay, cool. Let's stop recording and I'll show them the rug.